So for this service, I'd like to share on the topic of the centurion who was worthy.
咁今次嘅聚會，我想以呢個題目配稱的百夫長嚟做分享。
So a centurion was an officer of the Roman army who commanded about 100 soldiers.
咁呢個百夫長咧，其實係羅馬帝國嘅一個士兵，佢會去睇呢個大概100個嘅士兵。
So definitely not senior as say like a general.
咁就唔係好似一個首長咁高級。
But definitely a soldier who commanded authority and respect.
咁但係咧，佢都係一個有被尊重嘅一個嘅士兵。
Because there are a few centurions mentioned in the New Testament.
喺呢個新約入邊，其實有幾個百夫長去被講述。
The most well-known being that of Cornelius in the Book of Acts.
咁呢個就係哥尼流喺呢一個使徒行傳入邊係有被講到嘅。
Who Apostle Peter both preached to and then baptized together with his family.
咁呢個彼得就去呢一個同佢去講道，亦都係為佢嘅家人去受洗。
But for this service, I'd like to share on a centurion who is mentioned in the Gospel books.
咁我今日想分享嘅呢個百夫長咧，就喺呢個福音書入邊去記載。
So this centurion is actually nameless in the Bible.
咁呢一個百夫長其實喺聖經入邊冇記載到佢嘅名。
And unlike Cornelius,
咁唔係好似哥尼流咁樣。
There's no indication that he ever went on to believe and follow Jesus.
咁我哋就冇知道佢究竟有冇繼續去跟隨耶穌，相信耶穌。
But there's still things that I think we can learn from this centurion that we can apply to our own faith.
咁但係我哋都可以喺呢個百夫長身上去學習，亦都去學習運用喺我哋嘅信仰生活當中。
Okay, let's start by turning to the book of Luke, chapter 7.
我哋去打開路加福音嘅第7章。
And we're going to read verse 1 and verse 2.
我哋去睇第1到第2節。
So that's Luke chapter 7.
路加福音第7章
verse 1 to verse 2.
第1到第2節。
Okay, verse 1. Now when he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die.
第1節，耶穌對百姓講完了這一切的話，就進了迦百農。有一位百夫長所寶貴的僕人害病快要死了。
So these two verses set out the basis of this story.
咁呢兩節就係講到呢一個故事嘅背景。
Okay, so firstly, it lets us know that this centurion was based either in or at least near the town of Capernaum.
咁我哋知道呢一個百夫長佢所在嘅地一係喺迦百農入邊或者喺附近。
So Capernaum was one of the towns that surrounded the Sea of Galilee in Israel.
咁呢一個迦百農係喺呢個加利利嘅附近。
So Jesus spent a lot of his ministry in the areas around that Sea of Galilee.
咁呢個耶穌咧就喺呢個加利利海嘅附近用咗好多時間去傳福音。
And it also seems he particularly spent a lot of time in Capernaum.
咁佢亦都係花咗好多時間喺迦百農入邊。
Including picking some of the 12 disciples from that town.
佢亦都喺呢一度迦百農入邊去揀選幾個門徒。
And so many of his miracles were also performed in these places and particularly in Capernaum.
咁呢個耶穌喺呢一個迦百農入邊亦都行咗好多嘅神蹟。
Okay, so the reason that this story is included in the book of Luke is that this centurion has a servant who is sick and near death.
咁點解呢個故事被記載喺路加福音當中？就係呢一個百夫長有一個寶貴嘅僕人，佢就嚟病死。
So having heard that Jesus had arrived into the town, the centurion seeks help from Jesus to heal his servant.
咁呢一個百夫長知道耶穌進城啦，佢就去求耶穌去幫助。
Okay, so let's now read verse 9 to verse 10.
我哋去睇第9到第10節。
Verse 9.
第9節。
When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. 10. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick.
第9節，耶穌聽見這話就棄其他，轉身對跟隨的眾人說：我告訴你們，這麼大的信心，就是在以色列中，我也沒有遇見過。那託來的人回到百夫長家裏，看見僕人已經好了。
So this verse 9 and 10 are the end or the conclusion of this passage.
咁呢個9到10節其實係喺呢個故事入邊嘅結尾。
So here we see that Jesus hears the words from the centurion.
咁呢度耶穌就講呢個說話。
You see that he commends this centurion among the crowd that are following him.
咁佢就會轉身去同呢一啲跟隨佢嘅眾人去講，
praising his great faith.
就去讚美佢咁大嘅信心。
So even though this centurion is not a Jew and is a Roman soldier, so even though the centurion is not a Jew,
因為呢個百夫長佢唔係一個猶太人
and is a Roman soldier,
佢係一個羅馬嘅士兵，
but because of his faith,
但因為佢嘅信心，
we see that Jesus deems him to be worthy and grants his request to heal his servant.
咁耶穌就話佢係配呢個被醫治去醫治佢。
So in this service, we're going to study into why Jesus praised the centurion for having such great faith.
咁我哋今個嘅聚會就會去解釋點解耶穌去讚呢一個百夫長有咁大嘅信心。
A faith that, in Jesus' words, that is not even matched among the Israelites.
咁呢個信心耶穌話係喺以色列當中都冇遇過。
Okay, so let's go back a bit and let's read verse 3 to verse 5.
我哋去睇翻前邊，睇翻3至到5節。
Verse 3. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue.
第3節，百夫長風聞耶穌的事，就託猶太人的幾個長老去求耶穌來救他的僕人。他們到了耶穌那裏，就切切地求他說：你給他行這事是他所配得的，因為他愛我們的百姓，給我們建造會堂。
So we see that actually, rather than the centurion approaching Jesus himself,
咁其實唔係百夫長佢自己去親近耶穌，
that he actually sent some of the Jewish elders to approach Jesus.
而係派咗幾個猶太嘅長老去揾耶穌。
Now, in Jewish society, elders have an important role as leaders and also taking on a role as judges among the people.
咁呢個猶太嘅長老其實喺呢個猶太嘅社會入邊係有好高嘅地位，佢哋唔單止係首領，亦都係會係判斷人。
And also, for history, that the Jews generally have a negative relationship with the Romans.
咁其實喺呢個歷史當中，猶太人佢哋係同羅馬人相處得唔好。
As they were, by that point, they were an occupied nation under Rome.
咁其實羅馬係統治緊佢哋。
But we see that these elders didn't go to Jesus because they had been commanded to.
咁但係呢幾個猶太人唔係因為佢哋係被命令去見耶穌，
But that they did so willingly.
佢哋係自願去咁樣去做。
Because we see that they not only asked Jesus, but they praise the centurion for what he has done for the Jewish people.
咁佢哋唔單止係去求耶穌，佢哋都去讚美呢個百夫長為佢哋所做嘅事。
And they tell Jesus that the centurion is both deserving or you could say worthy.
咁佢哋就話俾耶穌知呢個百夫長係配得嘅。
And they probably felt that they needed to say this because it was not normal or perhaps not even acceptable for Jesus to go and help a Roman.
咁佢哋就覺得自己點解要去咁樣去解釋？可能因為覺得耶穌係唔會咁樣去幫助呢啲羅馬人。
Okay. Okay, let's continue to read verse 6 and 7.
我哋繼續去睇第6到第7節。
Okay, verse 6. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore, I do not even think myself worthy to come to you, but say the word, and my servant will be healed.
第6節，耶穌就和他們同去，離那家不遠。百夫長託幾個朋友去見耶穌，對他說：主啊，不要勞動，因你到我舍下，我不敢當。我也自以為不配去見你，只要你說一句話，我的僕人就必好了。
So Jesus actually agreed to the request of the elders.
咁呢個耶穌咧就去接受咗呢一個猶太長老嘅請求。
And they were on their way to the house of the centurion.
佢哋就去緊呢個百夫長嘅家。
But the centurion actually sends out some messengers to meet Jesus.
咁佢就百夫長其實就派咗幾個朋友去見耶穌。
And so we see that from the words of those messengers.
咁呢幾個人佢哋去講嘅說話。
We see that when compared to the elders, that actually the centurion himself does not see himself as being worthy.
咁呢一個同對比起呢個長老佢哋所講嘅說話咧，呢個百夫長覺得自己係唔配去見耶穌。
So not just that he's not worthy for Jesus to come to his house,
唔單止係唔配令耶穌去佢屋企，
but that he doesn't even feel worthy for he himself to come before Jesus.
佢甚至覺得自己亦都唔配去到嚟耶穌嘅面前。
And we see that he does not use his good deeds for the Jews to try to convince Jesus,
佢都冇話，因為我為咗呢個猶太人做嘅好事，你就要去幫助我。
or in a different way, to use his authority as a centurion to command Jesus to come to his house.
或者係用百夫長嘅權力去命令耶穌嚟。
So what do we see in the centurion?
我哋喺呢個百夫長身上睇到啲乜嘢呢？
Well, we see that he is a man who is humble.
我哋就見到呢一個係個謙卑嘅人。
Okay, let's turn to the book of Psalms,
我哋去睇呢一個詩篇，
chapter 10, verse 17.
我哋去睇第10章第17節。
Psalm chapter 10,
詩篇第10篇
verse 17.
第17節。
Verse 17. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You have prepared the heart. You cause your ear to hear.
第17節，耶和華啊，謙卑人的心願你早已知道，你必預備他們的心，也必側耳聽他們的祈求。
So humility is an important virtue for all Christians to have.
呢個謙卑係一個每一個基督徒都需要去有。
But even for a Gentile like this centurion was,
咁但係好似呢個外邦人，好似呢個百夫長，
if you're wanting to come to Jesus to ask something from him,
如果你想嚟到耶穌面前去祈求佢，
then of course you must have humility towards Jesus.
當然你要去對耶穌謙卑。
And the Bible tells us repeatedly across both the Old and New Testament that God listens to and lifts up those who are humble.
咁喺呢個舊約同埋新約入邊，聖經不停咁樣提醒我哋，耶穌係會升高呢個謙卑嘅人，
And that he resists those who are proud.
咁佢就會去制止呢一啲驕傲嘅人。
So while I don't think this is a reason why Jesus praised the faith of the centurion,
雖然我覺得耶穌唔係因為佢嘅謙卑，所以去讚美呢一個百夫長嘅信心。
humility is still a very important virtue that we all must have.
但係呢一個謙卑都係一個非常之重要，我哋要有嘅。
Okay, so let's continue. We're going to look at the difference between the faith of the elders and the centurion.
我哋去繼續睇呢個長老佢哋嘅信心同埋呢個百夫長嘅信心有啲咩唔同？
Let's turn back to Luke chapter 7.
我哋繼續去睇翻呢個路加福音嘅第7章。
And let's now reread verse 3.
我哋去再睇翻呢個第3節。
Okay, so let's Luke chapter 7, verse 3.
路加福音第7章第3節。
Verse 3. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant.
第3節，百夫長風聞耶穌的事，就託猶太人的幾個長老去求耶穌來救他的僕人。
Okay, so as we read earlier, the centurion sends these Jewish elders to ask Jesus.
咁我哋之前就有睇到呢個百夫長去派呢個幾個嘅長老去見耶穌。
So in the second half of this verse, we see that these elders actually plead with Jesus to come to the house.
咁呢一個百夫長，我哋喺後邊係見到呢個百夫長求耶穌去佢嘅家入邊。
So at first it can seem a little unclear.
咁可能一開始我哋覺得唔係好清楚。
Like, was it the centurion who told the elders to bring Jesus to his home to heal the servant?
係咪百夫長叫呢個長老叫耶穌嚟到家中去醫治佢嘅僕人呢？
But if we also read verse 7 again.
但係我哋再去睇第7節。
Okay, therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to come to you, but say the word and my servant will be healed.
第7節，我也自以為不配去見你，只要你說一句話，我的僕人就必好了。
So when we look at the words of the centurion himself, then it becomes clear that it was not he that was asking for Jesus to come.
咁我哋再去睇呢個百夫長嘅說話，其實就唔係百夫長叫耶穌要嚟去嘅屋企。
So that the pleading that was mentioned in verse 3 was actually from the initiative of the Jewish elders themselves.
咁呢個第3節所求嘅係佢哋猶太長老佢哋自己所諗。
But coming to Jesus and asking him to come and heal someone, I think is sounds like quite a normal thing to do.
咁我覺得咧，其實我哋叫耶穌去到佢家中去醫治佢，其實係一件好平常嘅事。
Okay, we can look at another example.
我哋可以睇第二個例子。
Okay, so let's jump forward to Luke chapter 8.
我哋去睇路加福音嘅第8章。
And let's read verse 41 to verse 42.
我哋睇第41到42節。
That's Luke chapter 8.
路加福音第8章。
Verse 41 to verse 42.
第41到42節。
Verse 41. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him.
41節，有一個管會堂的，名叫睚魯，來俯伏在耶穌腳前，求耶穌到他家裏去，因為他有一個獨生女兒，約有16歲，快要死了。耶穌去的時候，眾人擁擠他。
So this is the story of one of the Jewish leaders called Jairus, who had a daughter who was sick.
咁我哋喺呢度就見到有一個猶太嘅一個首領叫做睚魯，佢嘅女兒咧就快要病死啦。
And actually later in the story, she actually dies before they even arrive at the house.
咁喺呢個故事後邊，其實當耶穌未到呢個家中嘅時候，呢個女兒已經過身。
But at the beginning of the story here, we see like in the chapter 7 that we read, that Jairus begs Jesus to come to heal his daughter.
咁我哋去睇呢個故事嘅開頭，其實就好似第7章一樣，呢個睚魯去求耶穌去到佢嘅家中。
So again, this should sound quite a normal thing to do.
咁其實呢一個係好平常正常嘅事。
Now, when we are ill or hurt today,
當我哋今日受傷真病，
we expect to physically see a doctor, whether it's in the GP surgery or in the hospital.
咁我哋就可能會去呢個診所或者去呢個醫院去面對面咁去睇醫生。
And certainly when we're there, then we expect the doctor to eventually come to examine us.
咁我哋去到嗰時候，我哋就會知道呢個醫生會去檢查我哋。
And only then to prescribe some medicine or else whatever other treatment may be necessary.
咁佢哋檢查完我哋之後，就可能會俾藥我哋或者去做一啲嘅治療。
If the doctor only just speaks to us on the phone, for example,
咁譬如嗱，我哋只係同醫生喺電話對話，
and then immediately prescribes the medicine,
咁即刻佢就俾藥你啦。
perhaps we would then we feel a bit more doubtful that whether this doctor is really like considered what we may have properly.
咁我哋就可能會有啲懷疑，其實呢個醫生究竟知唔知道我哋係真係咩病呢？
Or that whether the medicine that he's now prescribing us is even the correct one and the one that will help us.
咁佢俾我哋嘅藥究竟係咪啱？係咪真係可以幫到我哋呢？
You can say in general that we expect some sort of like action or interaction to be needed first.
咁我哋首先其實都會去期待會有一啲嘅互動，有一啲嘅行動。
For another example,
另一個例子，
there are some other churches where they have pastors who do like so-called healing during their services.
咁有一啲其他嘅教會咧，佢哋就有一啲牧者，佢哋會喺聚會當中去醫治佢哋嘅信徒。
Though I have to say that it's of course been proven that what they're doing is not real.
咁但係我哋亦都知道證明咗佢哋所做嘅唔係真實。
But they usually do these healings in front as a sort of big demonstration in front of the whole congregation.
咁佢哋通常就會喺好多人嘅面前去做呢一啲醫治嘅動作。
And you see that the pastor usually will either lay hands or touch them in some way before, say, announcing that how this person can now suddenly walk pain-free.
咁佢哋就會有一啲嘅動作，譬如係按手喺嗰個人上，就會話啦：你而家可以起身起行啦。
It's part of our nature that we expect, we expect some sort of action or to have happened first.
咁其實係我哋人嘅本性，我哋會去期望有一啲嘅行動發生。
Asking Jesus to come and heal either yourself or someone else does require real faith.
咁其實我哋叫耶穌嚟去醫治我哋，或者係醫治其他人都需要有一個信心。
It's a belief that Jesus really has the power to heal and to help that person.
咁其實我哋首先係相信耶穌係可以醫治嗰個人。
But even within this story of Jairus, we can see a different example.
咁喺呢個睚魯入邊，我哋可以見到另一樣嘅例子。
Let's read verse 47 to verse 48.
我哋去睇47到48節。
Okay, verse 47.
47節。
Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, Daughter, be of good cheer, your faith has made you well. Go in peace.
47節，那女人知道不能隱藏，就戰戰兢兢地來俯伏在耶穌腳前，把摸他的緣故和怎樣那刻得好了，當着眾人都說出來。耶穌對她說：女兒，你的信救了你，平平安安地去吧。
So this happens while they are on their way to Jairus' house.
咁喺呢件事情係發生喺佢哋喺去呢個睚魯嘅家中途中。
So as we read in verse 42, there's a large group of people all walking together, and they're all like, as happens in a large group, there people are getting pushed around.
咁喺42節，我哋見到其實耶穌去嘅過程當中有好多人去擁擠佢。
So among this crowd, there's this woman who had a faith that just touching Jesus would be enough to heal her.
咁喺咁多人嘅當中，有一個女人係非常有信心，相信只要我掂耶穌，我就會得醫治。
So to be clear, that it doesn't mean that Jesus touching her.
而唔係耶穌去掂佢。
So this is another level of faith above that of people like Jairus.
咁呢一個係另一種信心，係超越呢個睚魯嘅信心。
And so in verse 48, Jesus commends her for her faith.
咁48節入邊，耶穌去稱讚佢嘅信心。
And we can see an important teaching in Jesus' reply.
我哋去喺耶穌嘅回應當中有一個好重要嘅教訓。
He says to her, "Your faith has made you well."
佢就話：你嘅信救了你。
So actually, it's not because she physically touched Jesus' garment that made her well.
唔係因為佢掂到耶穌嘅衣服，所以令到佢好返。
Though of course that would be an amazing thing in itself.
咁當然，如果係咁樣，係非常之奇妙。
But simply having that level of faith in Jesus that such a thing is even a possibility.
咁但係佢就係有咁樣嘅信心，去相信咁樣嘅事喺耶穌當中都係可以實行。
Because if it really was just about touching Jesus,
如果只係單純去掂耶穌，
it would mean that all these people who are walking along and bumping into Jesus would have any of their problems automatically healed.
咁就係講到啦。如果我哋喺行路嘅途中見到耶穌，我哋掂一掂佢，所有嘅問題都可以解決。
So of course we know that is not the case.
我哋知道唔係咁樣。
Okay, when we look back at the centurion,
我哋去睇返呢個百夫長。
we see yet another level of faith that is greater than that of Jairus and the Jewish elders.
我哋去見到佢嘅信心係超越呢個睚魯，亦都超越呢個猶太嘅長老。
So let's turn back again to chapter 7.
我哋去打返開第7章。
And let's read verse 7 again.
我哋再去睇第7節。
And we're going to read the second half of this verse.
我哋去睇下半段。
Okay, verse 7. But say the word, and my servant will be healed.
只要你說一句話，我的僕人就必好了。
So it is in this second part of the verse that we see the level of faith of the centurion.
咁我哋喺呢個下半段就見到呢個百夫長嘅信心。
He says, say the word, and my servant will be healed.
佢話只要你講一句，我嘅僕人就必好了。
So all that's required is that Jesus simply declares it, and it will be done.
只係耶穌簡單講一句，咁就會成全。
His faith is demonstrated further in verse 8.
咁喺呢個第8節入邊，我哋可以更加睇到佢嘅信心。
Let's read verse 8.
我哋睇第8節。
8. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it.
第8節，因為我在人的權下，也有兵在我以下。對這個說去，他就去；對那個說來，他就來；對我的僕人說你做這事，他就去做。
So as a centurion, as we said at the beginning, he's in a position of authority over other soldiers, roughly 100 soldiers.
咁喺呢個百夫長，我哋喺開頭亦都講到，佢係有呢個權柄，大概係有100個兵喺佢嘅旗下。
In his role as the commander of these soldiers, he just needs to make a command, and it will happen.
咁佢作為佢哋嘅領導，只要佢一聲令下，佢哋就會去行動。
He does not need to go and check.
佢唔需要去檢查，
or to go and then later do it himself.
或者係佢自己去做。
So likewise, he is saying that he believes in the authority and power of Jesus.
咁其實相同嘅，佢就亦都相信耶穌嘅權柄。
That as long as Jesus intends for something to happen,
只要耶穌願意一件事去實行，
then like the centurion's own commands, then this thing will definitely happen.
就好似百夫長自己嘅命令一樣，呢一啲事情都會發生。
So that's why he says to Jesus that all that Jesus needs to do is to say the word.
咁所以佢就同耶穌講，只要你講一句說話就可以啦。
And then his servant can definitely be healed.
咁佢嘅僕人就一定會被醫治。
No, he does not think that Jesus needs to touch or lay hands or even to physically see this servant to be able to heal him.
佢唔覺得耶穌需要去按手或者去掂呢個僕人，或者去甚至見到呢個僕人先可以醫佢。
So that is why, as we read at the beginning, that Jesus commended the faith of this centurion.
咁所以我哋就知道點解耶穌去稱讚呢一個百夫長嘅信心。
That he had not seen such faith even in Israel.
咁大嘅信心，佢話甚至喺以色列都沒有遇到。
Because as we saw in those few examples, even the Jewish people who have faith still ask Jesus to come.
因為我哋見到其他嘅猶太人，佢哋都係有信心，但係佢哋仍然叫耶穌要前嚟。
Let's turn to the book of Psalms.
我哋去睇下開詩篇。
Okay, let's read chapter 33.
我哋睇33章。
Let's read verse 6 to verse 9.
我哋睇第6到第9節。
Psalms 33.
詩篇33篇。
Verse 6 to verse 9.
第6到第9節。
Okay, verse 6.
第6節。
By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the water of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all his inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast.
第6節，諸天藉耶和華的命而造，萬象藉他口中的氣而成。他聚集海水魚類，收藏深洋在庫房。願全地都敬畏耶和華，願世上的居民都懼怕他，因為他說有就有，命立就立。
Okay, so this psalm is talking about the creation of the earth.
咁呢個詩人就講到神去創造天地。
So as we should hopefully all know, God, as recorded in Genesis chapter 1, that God created the world in 6 days.
咁我哋喺呢個創世記嘅第1章就知道神用咗6天去創造天地。
And verse 9 here is a summary of how creation was done.
咁喺呢個9節就係講到呢一個只有創造天地係點樣發生。
Verse 9 says, He spoke and it was done.
咁樣就話佢話有就有。
So even for something as great as creation,
咁即使係好似創造天地咁大嘅事，
all God needed to do was to say it.
咁神要做嘅嘢只係去講。
Meaning for God just to intend for it to happen, and then it would happen.
即係話耶穌神想呢件事發生就會發生。
So that is the power of God.
咁呢個就係神嘅權能。
Let's look at a different example.
咁我哋去睇第二個例子。
Let's turn to Psalms chapter 78.
我哋去睇詩篇第78篇。
Let's read verse 17 to verse 20.
我哋睇17至到20節。
Psalms chapter 78.
詩篇第78篇。
Verse 17 to 20.
17至到20節。
Verse 17.
17節。
But they sinned even more against him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide meat for his people?
17節，他們卻仍舊得罪他，在乾旱之地叛逆至高者。他們心中試探神，隨自己所欲的求食物，並且妄論神說：神在曠野豈能擺設筵席嗎？他曾擊打磐石，使水湧出，成為乾河。他還能賜糧食嗎？還能為他的百姓預備肉嗎？
So this psalm is a reflection on the sins of the rebelliousness of the Israelites throughout their history.
咁呢一個詩人就去想翻呢個以色列人佢哋係幾咁嘅叛逆。
And also on the mercies of God upon his people.
但亦都去思考呢個神對佢嘅百姓嘅憐憫。
So this particular passage recalls back to when they were in the wilderness with Moses.
咁呢一個章節特別去講翻佢哋喺同摩西一齊喺曠野嘅時候。
So in this incident, the people were complaining to Moses about only having manna to eat.
咁呢一個事情就係百姓去同摩西投訴，只有呢個瑪拿去食。
So the people were complaining and demanding for meat.
咁佢哋就去求要肉。
But in verse 18 to 20,
喺18到20節，
the psalmist here says that the Israelites are actually testing the power of God.
咁呢個詩人就話其實呢啲以色列人係試探神嘅能力，
Even after seeing miracles like water coming out from rock,
即使佢哋見到神蹟就係喺呢個磐石出水，
they are choosing to test God to see if he can produce meat for them in the wilderness.
佢哋就係要去試探神究竟可唔可以喺曠野中為佢哋預備肉。
Let's continue to read verse 21 to 22.
我哋繼續睇21到22節。
Verse 21.
21節，
Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. So fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation.
21節，所以耶和華聽見就發怒，有烈火向雅各燒起，有怒氣向以色列上騰，因為他們不信服神，不倚賴他的救恩。
So though God did listen to the request and gave them meat in the form of the bird quail,
咁雖然呢一個神亦都有聽佢哋去嘅祈求，亦都為佢哋賜下肉俾佢哋。
we see that their testing and their lack of faith in God greatly angered God.
但係你見到佢哋咁樣去試探神，對神冇信心，係令神非常憤怒。
So actually, while they were all like gorging themselves on this meat when they arrived, they're gorging like eating the meat when they arrived.
咁佢哋就喺度食肉。
That God actually struck many of them in his anger.
咁但係其實神咧就擊殺咗佢哋好多人。
Okay, let's also read, turn to Numbers chapter 11.
我哋去睇民數記嘅11章，
Okay, let's read 21 to 23.
嚟睇21到23節。
Okay, so that's book of Numbers chapter 11,
民數記嘅第11章，
verse 21 to 23.
21到23節。
Okay, verse 21. And Moses said, the people who I am among are 600,000 men on foot. Yet you have said, I will give them meat that they may eat for a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to provide enough for them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to provide enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen to you or not.
21節，摩西對耶和華說：這樣我同住的百姓步行的男人有60萬，你還說我要把肉給他們，使他們可以吃一整個月？難道給他們宰了羊群、牛群，或是把海中所有的魚都聚了來，就夠他們吃嗎？耶和華對摩西說：耶和華的膀臂豈是縮短了嗎？現在要看我的話向你應驗不應驗。
So here in this chapter in Numbers is where the actual incident happens.
咁呢個民數記11章就係記載咗呢件事情嘅發生。
And so this is at the end after God hears the complaints from Moses.
咁神就係非常之憤怒，因為佢聽到摩西向佢嘅投訴。
And God declares that he will indeed give meat to the people.
咁神就話啦，佢一定會俾呢個肉佢嘅百姓。
But here, interestingly, we see that even Moses is affected and shows doubts in the power of God.
咁我哋見到啦，好有趣嘅就係摩西竟然都去懷疑神。
You see that he questions whether God can really provide meat for so many people.
咁佢就問神啦：你真係可以預備咁多肉俾咁多人？
You know, that Moses cannot seem to imagine this being a possibility.
咁摩西就想象唔到呢一件事係可行。
So God replies to Moses,
咁神就去回答摩西：
has the Lord's arm been shortened?
咁神嘅膀臂係咪縮短咗咧？
No, he's effectively asking Moses, has my power become limited?
咁佢就問摩西：其實我嘅能力係咪削弱咗咧？
So with even Moses' lack of faith,
咁雖然摩西佢冇呢個信心，
we see that God just tells him, you wait and see.
咁神就同佢講：你等待去睇。
Okay, so let's turn back to Psalms chapter 78.
我哋去睇翻呢個詩篇第78篇，
And we're going to continue to read verse 41 to 43.
我哋去睇41到43節。
That's Psalm 78,
詩篇第78篇，
verse 41 to 43.
第41到43節。
Okay, verse 41. Yes, again and again they tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power, the day when he redeemed them from the enemy, when he worked his signs in Egypt and his wonders in the field of Zoan.
41節，他們再三試探神，惹動以色列的聖者，他們不追念他的能力和贖他們脫離敵人的日子，他怎樣在埃及地顯神蹟，在所安田顯奇事。
So in verse 41, the psalmist says that the Israelites actually limited God.
咁呢個第41節就講到佢哋去限制神。
So, of course, this doesn't mean that they actually were able to limit the power of God.
咁當然唔係講到佢哋真係可以限制神嘅力量。
But rather that in their minds that they have limited the power of God.
咁但係喺佢哋嘅心入邊，佢哋係限制咗神嘅力量。
Of what God is able to do.
佢哋限制咗自己覺得神可以做嘅事情。
We find that this can happen when we doubt God, like an example we read of Moses.
咁我哋就可以去諗下，好似喺摩西咁樣，我哋都會係咁樣去發生。
Or where we start to question or even complain against God, like the Israelites repeatedly did.
咁我哋就會去問質疑神，甚至去投訴神，就好似以色列人咁樣。
So it tells us here by doing so, we are actually limiting God in our mind.
咁我哋其實咁樣係去限制咗神嘅能力，喺度試探神。
Now for Moses, you could say there's some like stressful factors for him.
咁我哋知道其實摩西都有好大嘅壓力。
It was a point where he was, particularly stressed from his role in leading the Israelites.
咁尤其是佢係作為呢個領導以色列人嘅人，佢係非常之大嘅壓力。
Because God also hadn't yet assigned the 70 elders to help him in judging the people.
當時神未去立呢個70個長老去幫助佢。
So Moses was still bearing much of the burden alone.
咁其實摩西係自己承受好大嘅壓力。
And certainly we know that Moses was a man who definitely had faith in God.
但係我知道摩西其實係一個對神有信心嘅人。
But we also saw in Numbers chapter 11 that at that point at least that even Moses could doubt and limit the power of God in his mind.
咁其實當時喺民數記嘅11章，我哋見到即使如同摩西，佢都會去限制或者想像唔到神嘅能力。
So it's not just a question of whether we have faith in God.
唔係話我哋究竟對神有冇信心，
But that even though we have faith in God,
即使我哋對神有信心，
if we reflect back on ourselves,
咁我哋去思考翻自己，
then do we limit God in our minds?
我哋喺我哋嘅思想入邊有冇限制神呢？
Do we have doubts about whether God can really do what we pray and ask for?
我哋有冇去諗，其實懷疑神究竟係咪真係可以去藉住好似我哋祈求咁樣去行呢？
Or that do we even complain against God?
或者係我哋甚至去投訴神？
So in verse 43,
喺43節，
it recalls back that there are many signs that were performed back in Egypt.
就講到喺神入邊係顯咗好多神蹟喺呢個埃及。
Okay, so most famously, there was the 10 plagues against the Egyptians.
最出名嘅就係呢個10災。
So each plague was a demonstration of God's power.
咁每一災其實都係顯示緊神嘅能力。
In each one showing that he could do what to man is impossible or even unthinkable.
咁其實就係每一災都話俾我哋知道，我哋想象唔到嘅事，神都能夠去做。
God isn't just asking us to blindly have faith that he is truly omnipotent.
咁我哋神唔係去話俾要我哋麻木咁樣相信佢係無所不能。
Okay, meaning to just blindly have faith that God is all powerful.
只係麻木咁樣去相信神係有能力。
We are given the stories in the Bible of God's power.
我哋喺聖經入邊可以見到神嘅能力。
But we also have our own experiences of how God helps us.
但係唔單止係咁，就喺我哋日常生活當中都有呢一個例子，神點樣幫助。
And the testimonies of our fellow brethren.
或者係我哋弟兄姊妹嘅見證。
God gives us these to help to strengthen our faith in him.
神俾呢一啲都係想我哋係對佢更有信心。
But like the Israelites and even Moses,
就好似呢個以色列人或者係呢一個摩西，
we can forget about what God has already done for us.
我哋可能會忘記神為我哋做嘅事。
Then we become in danger of doubting and putting limits on God.
咁咪就有危險啦，我哋就可能去懷疑神。
To conclude, let's look at 2 teachings from Jesus.
咁我哋去結束，我哋要睇耶穌所講嘅2個教訓。
Let's turn first to Matthew chapter 19.
我哋去睇馬太福音嘅19章。
Let's read verse 26.
我哋去睇第26節。
Matthew chapter 19,
馬太福音19章
verse 26.
第26節。
Verse 26. But Jesus looked at them and said to them, With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible.
26節，耶穌看着他們說，在人這是不能的，在神凡事都能。
So firstly, just to reiterate that with God all things are possible.
咁呢度再次去重申，在神凡事都能。
Because again, as we just said, God is omnipotent, meaning all powerful.
咁我哋就講到啦，神係無所不能，即係佢係有好無限嘅大能。
There was a period in my life where I doubted and even questioned whether those who had left God could be brought back.
咁喺我嘅人生當中有一段時間，我就去諗有啲離開咗神嘅人，究竟佢哋係咪可以回來？
But later seeing how even after a long time that God really is able to bring people back.
咁我就之後發現，真係即使過咗好長嘅時間，其實神都可以將呢一啲嘅迷羊帶翻嚟。
So now I remember these miracles from the past, and at least in this way, I don't limit God again.
咁我就去記得神嘅呢一個大能，即喺呢一個方面，我就冇去限制神嘅能力。
I no longer doubt God's ability to bring someone back even after many years.
我冇再去懷疑神究竟係咪可以一個人離開咗教會好耐，仍然可以帶佢翻嚟。
Let's also turn to Matthew chapter 21.
我哋去打開馬太福音嘅21章。
Let's read verse 21 to 22.
我哋去睇21到22節。
Matthew chapter 21.
馬太福音21章
verse 21 to 22.
21到22節。
Verse 21. So Jesus answered and said to them, Assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but also if you say to this mountain, Be removed and be cast into the sea, it will be done. And whatever things you ask in prayer, believing you will receive.
21節，耶穌回答說：我實在告訴你們，你們若有信心，不懷疑，不但能行無花果樹上所行的事，就是對這座山說：你挪開此地，投在海裏，也必成就。你們禱告，無論求什麼，只要信，就必得着。
So, firstly, to mention something like a teaching from much earlier.
咁就好似我哋啱啱所提到嘅教訓。
That, of course, it's very important that when we come before Jesus, that we have humility towards Jesus.
咁當然我哋去到耶穌面前，我哋必須要謙卑。
But as also in this reminder here,
咁但係呢度亦都提醒我哋，
we are reminded that when we ask something from Jesus,
當我哋去向神去求一啲事，
that it is not through some action or some such thing that makes it happen.
唔係話我哋去做咗啲咩行動，令到呢件事情可以發生。
Going back to the example of the doctor, we do not need to be seen or touched for what we ask to be fulfilled by God.
唔係話好似睇醫生咁，我哋要被睇或者被觸摸，我哋神先可以滿足我哋。
Or we are simply asked to have faith and not to doubt Him.
而係我哋只係對神有信心，唔去懷疑。
Like the woman who was healed of her illness.
就好似呢個血漏嘅女人被醫治。
As Jesus replied to her.
耶穌去回答佢。
Jesus grants our faith, grants our request because of our faith.
咁係神去回應我哋嘅要求，係因為我哋嘅信心。
As Jesus says here, believing you will receive.
咁就好似耶穌所講，你們只要信就必得着。
So in our faith, so even though we have faith,
雖然我哋有信心，
we must not doubt God.
我哋唔可以懷疑神。
Or to put limits on God.
或者係去限制神。
Okay, my sharing ends here.
我嘅分享到呢度。
Okay, may all glory be unto God.
願一切嘅榮耀歸俾神。
Okay, let's conclude by rising up to sing hymn 379.
我哋結束起立唱詩。